The air in the grand chamber was thick with tension. The Xelari High Council, a circle of towering, silver-skinned beings with glowing, pupil-less eyes, sat in judgment before the lone human in the room. Captain Jack Carter stood his ground, hands clenched into fists, his battle-worn uniform still stained with the dust of war. He had just led humanity's greatest victory against the Xelari warlords, forcing them to sign a treaty that should have ended the bloodshed. And yet, instead of a hero's reward, he was being offered something no human had ever considered: marriage. Jack had faced death more times than he could count. He had walked through burning battlefields, survived impossible odds, and looked into the cold, alien eyes of creatures who had no mercy. But this was beyond anything he had prepared for. "You want me to do what?" His voice echoed in the chamber, his disbelief hanging in the silence that followed. The eldest of the council, High Chancellor Vorin, leaned forward. His face, sharp and almost reptilian, betrayed no emotion. "You have secured victory, Captain Carter. But victory alone is not enough to ensure peace. There must be unity between our species, a bond that cannot be broken. You will wed one of our own." Jack let out a sharp breath, glancing around the chamber. Hundreds of Xelari elites sat in silence, their expressions unreadable, but something in their body language felt off. Not the solemnity of an honorable peace, not the quiet acceptance of a political arrangement. No, this was something else. A sense of unease, fear even. "Not happening," Jack said flatly. "I fought this war to protect my people, not to be some pawn in your political games." "You misunderstand, Captain," Vorin said, his tone unshaken. "This is not a request." Jack's muscles tensed. His instincts screamed at him to walk away, to call their bluff. But then Vorin turned his hand, and a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. Jack's stomach dropped. Earth, or rather, a live feed of the Xelari fleet still hovering just beyond the Sol system. Even with the treaty in place, their warships remained armed, poised like a drawn blade at humanity's throat. A silent reminder of what could happen if diplomacy failed. Vorin's voice was calm, but the threat in his words was unmistakable. "Deny this, and peace will not hold. Earth has suffered enough, has it not? This union is the final act that ensures your people's survival." Jack ground his teeth. They had him. The bastards knew it. He had spent years fighting to keep Earth from falling. And now, with victory in his grasp, he was being given a choice that wasn't a choice at all. He exhaled slowly, trying to keep his anger in check. "And who, exactly, am I supposed to marry?" For the first time, there was hesitation. Vorin's expression did not change, but a ripple passed through the council. They shifted uncomfortably, as if preparing for something unpleasant. From the far end of the chamber, a door slid open with a whisper. Jack turned as she stepped into the light. The woman, if she could be called that, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Her skin was the color of midnight, her features sharp, almost too perfect. Unlike the others, her eyes had depth, twin pools of glowing violet that seemed to see straight through him. She wore a dark cloak that billowed behind her, but Jack noticed something strange. None of the Xelari in the room would meet her gaze. They watched her with stiff, guarded postures, as if she carried something unseen yet terrifying. Her name was spoken only once, in a voice laced with restrained unease. "Zyra." Jack frowned. He had never heard of her before, but the reaction of the Xelari told him everything he needed to know. This was not some noble's daughter, not a figure of honor or prestige. No, she was something else. Something they feared. "She is one of our own," Vorin said carefully. "And yet, she is an outcast." Jack didn't like the way he said that. Outcast. As if the word itself was laced with something dangerous. Zyra remained silent, her gaze unwavering as she studied him. There was no hostility in her eyes, but neither was there warmth. It was an expression Jack had seen before, not in soldiers, but in prisoners. People who had already decided their fate. Jack's mind raced. If the Xelari feared her, why force this? What were they not telling him? Why her? He demanded. Voran's lips tightened. It is the will of the council. Jack looked back at Zyra, searching for any sign of deception, but all he found was a quiet, unreadable resolve. He could refuse, walk away and let the war begin again. But was that truly an option? The Xelari had taken millions of human lives already. His homeworld had been pushed to the brink. He took a breath, his decision settling like iron in his chest. Fine, he said. I accept. A whisper ran through the chamber, barely audible, yet unmistakable. Relief, but also dread. Jack felt the shift in the air before he saw it. Zyra raised her hands and slowly pulled back the hood of her cloak. The moment she did, the silence in the room turned suffocating. The Xelari tensed as if expecting an explosion. Jack's breath caught. Her eyes, they weren't just glowing. They were burning. Twin flames of violet energy flickered in their depths, something alive, something unnatural. The air around her seemed to distort, bending in ways his mind struggled to process. A faint hum filled the room, and every Xelari present flinched, as though suppressing the urge to flee. Jack had seen many things in war, but nothing like this. Zyra lowered her gaze slightly, her voice soft, but carrying an edge of warning. You should not have accepted me. Jack barely had time to register her words before the chamber lights flickered, and for the first time since stepping into that room, he felt a cold spike of fear crawl down his spine. Something was very, very wrong. The journey back to Jack's ship was silent. The Xelari guards kept their distance, their postures stiff, their glowing eyes carefully avoiding Zyra. Jack had fought their kind for years. He had learned to read them, to understand their tells. And right now, every single one of them was on edge. Not because of him. Because of her. Zyra walked beside him, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were aware of every glance, every breath, every whisper that followed her. She had barely spoken since the ceremony, saying only what was necessary to complete the ritual. Jack had stood there, feeling more like a spectator than a participant, as they bound him to an alien woman he knew nothing about. Now, as they stepped onto the sleek, metallic ramp of his ship, the uneasy silence stretched between them. The moment the hatch sealed behind them, Jack turned on his heel, arms crossed. All right, start talking. Zyra lifted her violet gaze to meet his, unblinking. About what? Jack let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, I don't know. Maybe the fact that the Xelari just handed me their most feared outcast and refused to tell me why. Or maybe the part where an entire room of battle-hardened warlords flinched the moment you pulled back your hood. Zyra was still for a moment. Then she walked past him. Jack watched as she traced her fingers over the cold steel of the ship's interior, her touch slow, as if feeling something he couldn't. They fear what they do not understand, she finally said. Jack narrowed his eyes. I don't like riddles. Be straight with me. Zyra exhaled, turning to face him fully. I was not born like them, she said. Not truly. There is something inside me, something they cannot explain. And so, they call it a curse. Jack studied her. She didn't sound angry. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acceptance, as if she had long made peace with whatever it was that made her different. And what exactly is this curse? Jack pressed. Zyra hesitated, just for a second. But Jack caught it. I do not know its full nature, she admitted, only that it has always been there. A force, an energy that does not belong to the Xelari, or to any species they have encountered. Jack frowned. He had read countless reports on Xelari biology. Their technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, their genetic manipulation far beyond anything Earth had achieved. If there was something in Zyra they couldn't explain, something that even they feared, then it had to be something unnatural. Zyra took a slow step toward him. You should not have accepted me, she said, repeating the same words she had spoken in the council chamber. Jack held her gaze, his gut telling him that there was more to this than she was letting on. And if I hadn't? She tilted her head slightly. Then they would have killed me. The words were spoken without emotion, but Jack felt a chill run through him. They gave me to you because they did not want to keep me, she continued. And they did not want to kill me themselves. This was the only way they could rid themselves of me without dishonoring their traditions. Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. He had been played. He should have seen it. The council had made it seem like this marriage was an honor, a necessary step for peace, but it was never about unity. It was a discarding. He had just inherited a problem that Xelari didn't know how to solve. Jack sat down in the pilot's chair, thinking, "So, what happens now? You expect me to just accept that I've married an outcast with some kind of unexplained alien power and not ask questions?" Zyra's lips curved slightly, almost. Not quite. A smile. "You are already asking questions, Captain Carter." Jack exhaled through his nose. "Damn right I am." The ship's console beeped, drawing his attention. The auto-navigation had plotted their course back to neutral space, but as Jack reached out to confirm, a sudden flicker in the ship's lighting made him pause. The overhead lights dimmed, pulsed, then stabilized. Jack's brow furrowed. That wasn't normal. Zyra stiffened slightly, her hands tightening at her sides. Jack noticed. "What?" She hesitated. "It happens sometimes." Jack straightened. "What happens?" Zyra's gaze shifted, as if she were debating whether to answer. Finally, she stepped closer. "Strange things. Machines react differently when I am near. Energy shifts in ways it should not. The Xelari thought it was a sign of something unnatural." Jack watched her carefully. "And what do you think?" Her expression was unreadable. "I think it is dangerous." The ship shuddered, just a little. A brief, almost imperceptible tremor beneath Jack's boots. His fingers hovered over the controls, but nothing on the readout suggested a system failure. No alarms, no malfunctions, yet the feeling remained. Jack turned back to Zyra. "Is this you?" She was completely still. "I do not control it. It just happens." Jack muttered a curse under his breath. "Well, that's reassuring." Before Zyra could respond, the ship's AI crackled to life. "Warning. Unidentified energy anomaly detected." Jack shot up from his seat, fingers flying over the controls. A red warning flashed across the main screen. "Unstable energy signature detected. Origin unknown." His pulse quickened. "Talk to me. What the hell is this?" The AI's response was eerily calm. Unable to classify energy pattern. Readings inconsistent with known Xelari or human technology. High probability of external influence. Jack's gut twisted. External influence? They were supposed to be in neutral space. There shouldn't be anything out here. Then, the ship's engines flickered. Not just a brief dimming. A full power drop. Jack's heart pounded. "Zyra, if there's something you're not telling me, now would be a damn good time." Zyra's expression was distant, her violet eyes glowing just slightly, like the embers of a dying fire. "I can feel it." Jack's breath caught. "Feel what?" She lifted her gaze to his, and in that moment, he saw something he had never seen before. Not fear, not uncertainty. Recognition. As if she knew exactly what was happening. The ship jolted violently, throwing them both off balance. Alarms blared. Jack grabbed the console, scanning the controls, but nothing made sense. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a malfunction. It was her. The lights above them pulsed again, matching the slow, rhythmic flicker of Zyra's glowing eyes. Jack's breath came fast and shallow as realization hit him like a hammer. The Xelari hadn't given him a wife. They had given him a weapon, and they had no idea what she was about to become. The ship jolted violently again, the force slamming Jack against the console. He gritted his teeth, gripping the edges of the panel as the alarms blared through the cockpit. The emergency lights cast eerie red glows across the interior, making the ship feel more like a sinking wreck than a functioning spacecraft. He punched in commands, trying to override the failing systems, but nothing was responding. Zyra stood motionless in the center of the room, her eyes flickering with that unsettling violet glow. Her expression remained unreadable, yet Jack could see the tension in her posture. Her fingers curled slightly, as if she was holding something back. "Zyra, what the hell is happening?" Jack barked. She inhaled slowly, her gaze locked on the flickering lights. "The energy, it's reacting." Jack's jaw clenched. Reacting to what? Her lips parted slightly, but before she could answer, a cold sensation washed over the cabin. It was subtle at first, a prickle at the back of Jack's neck, like the static charge before a lightning strike. Then, the temperature dropped. The ship's ventilation system didn't fail, yet the air turned frigid in seconds, his breath misting before his face. Jack had experienced a lot of strange things in battle: alien technology that defied logic, weapons that bent reality in ways humans still struggle to understand. But this felt different. Wrong. The ship groaned under invisible pressure, the walls seeming to vibrate at a frequency just beyond human hearing. Jack's stomach twisted. This wasn't some mechanical failure. This wasn't the result of battle damage or a software glitch. This was her. Zyra closed her eyes. The glow in her irises pulsed, in sync with the ship's failing power core. For a brief moment, Jack swore he could see something ripple around her. A distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from pavement, except these waves felt alive. Then everything stopped. The shaking ceased. The alarms cut off mid-blare. Even the hum of the ship's life support vanished, replaced by a deafening, unnatural silence. Jack's ears rang from the abrupt shift, his heart pounding. Then, a sound. Not from the ship, not from Zyra. From outside. A low, resonating thrum, deep and alien, vibrated through the hull. Jack had spent years in space. He knew the sounds of warships, of approaching cruisers, of debris striking metal. But this was none of those things. It was something else. He reached for the external scanners, but before his fingers touched the controls, the ship's monitors lit up on their own. The cockpit filled with a flood of chaotic data, flashing warnings, streams of unreadable symbols in a language Jack didn't recognize. The external cameras flickered, and for a brief second, an image flashed across the central screen. Jack's breath caught in his throat. A ship, or at least something shaped like one, hovered just beyond his own vessel. But it wasn't Xelari. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything he had ever seen before. The structure pulsed with an unnatural glow, shifting in color, almost as if it were breathing. It had no visible thrusters, no weapon systems, no identifiable features of any known spacecraft. It was just there, a silent, impossible presence in the void. And then, without warning, the ship spoke. The voice was neither male nor female. It wasn't mechanical, nor was it organic. It was something in between, a whisper that was not sound, but a thought forced into existence. "She is not yours." Jack's blood ran cold. The voice didn't come from the ship's speakers. It didn't even come from the air around him. It came from inside his mind. Zyra's head snapped up, her glowing eyes wide with recognition. Jack turned to her, his pulse racing. "What the hell is that?" She didn't answer. She was staring at the screen, at the shape outside. Her breathing had quickened. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked afraid. The voice returned. "You have taken what was never meant to be given." Jack swallowed hard, his instincts screaming at him to move, run, fight, anything but just stand there and listen. But his body refused to obey. Some force held him in place. His muscles locked in place like unseen hands were gripping his spine. He forced his voice through clenched teeth. "Who are you?" The silence that followed was worse than the voice. The air in the cockpit grew heavier, as if gravity itself had doubled. The screens flickered wildly, symbols shifting too fast to process. Then Zyra spoke. "You should not be here." Her voice was lower, carrying a resonance that wasn't entirely her own. Jack felt the hairs on his arms rise. The voice responded immediately, as if it had been waiting. "And yet I am." Jack's hands twitched toward his weapon, but he knew it would be useless. Whatever this was, it wasn't something he could fight with bullets. Zyra took a step forward. Her violet eyes locked onto the pulsing shape outside the ship. Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers curling into fists. "I was never yours," she said, her voice steadier this time. "You left me." Jack's breath hitched. Left her. The voice didn't deny it. Instead, it whispered, "And now I return." Zyra staggered. Jack instinctively moved to catch her, but the moment his hand touched her arm, a shockwave of raw energy exploded through his body. His vision blurred. His ears rang with a sound too vast for him to comprehend. For a moment, he wasn't on his ship. For a moment, he wasn't anywhere. Flashes of light, stars bending and breaking. A void so vast it swallowed entire civilizations. Shapes that weren't shapes, colors that had no name. And a presence. Watching. Waiting. Jack gasped as reality snapped back into place, his body slamming against the metal floor of the cockpit. His vision swam. The ship's alarms blared again, and the entire vessel shook as if something outside was pulling it apart. He forced himself up, his limbs shaking. Zyra was still standing, her back turned to him, her entire body glowing with that same violet energy. The voice pressed against the walls of his mind, colder now. "You cannot keep her from us." Jack's jaw tightened. His head was pounding, but through the haze of confusion, one thought cut through clearly. They weren't here for him. They were here for Zyra. And that meant he had a choice. Let them take her, or fight something he didn't even begin to understand. He wiped the blood from his lip, planted his feet, and reached for the ship's manual override. No one was taking his wife. Not without a fight. The ship convulsed like a dying beast. Jack barely had time to brace himself before another violent shudder knocked him off balance. The monitors flickered wildly, their data streams corrupted with alien symbols. The presence outside pressed against the hull like an unseen hand, its intent clear. They wanted Zyra. Zyra stood in the center of the cockpit, unmoving, her glowing violet eyes locked onto the pulsing anomaly outside. Her dark cloak billowed despite the still air inside the ship, caught in an unseen current of energy. Jack could feel it too. An oppressive weight pressing down on him, squeezing his lungs, making his thoughts sluggish. It was like standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into something that should not exist. The voice returned, slithering through the walls of his mind. "She belongs to us." Jack gritted his teeth, ignoring the cold sweat trickling down his spine. "Like hell she does," he growled, slamming his fist against the console. The ship groaned in protest as a new force took hold of it. The artificial gravity buckled for a brief moment, causing tools, loose equipment, and even Jack's own body to rise slightly before slamming back down. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the metal, as if the ship itself was being rewritten at a molecular level. Zyra clenched her fists. The glow in her eyes intensified, her irises now resembling twin stars burning with untamed energy. Jack forced himself upright, watching as tendrils of violet light began to crack through her skin like fractures in reality itself. And then, for the first time since the entity's arrival, Zyra spoke. "You are not welcome here." The voice didn't respond immediately. The air in the cockpit stilled, the tension stretching unbearably. Then the unseen force pressed harder. Jack fell to his knees, gasping as something pushed into his mind. Memories that weren't his, images flashing in and out of focus. A world not of metal and warships, but of endless shifting landscapes, where light had no source and time did not flow in a straight line. a place beyond what human understanding could grasp. Zyra's past, and the entity that had once claimed her. Jack's heart pounded as realization crashed into him. Zyra had never been a simple outcast. The Xelari hadn't just exiled her out of fear. They had stolen her from something older, something far more dangerous than their own kind. And now it had come to take her back. Jack forced his mind back into focus, shoving the invasive memories aside. His hands trembled, his muscles twitching with the aftershock of whatever had just touched him. Zyra turned toward him, her expression unreadable, but her voice was clear. "I can stop this." Jack pushed himself to his feet, using the edge of the console for support. "What the hell does that mean?" She looked at him, and for the first time since they met, Jack saw uncertainty in her eyes. "It means you need to let me go." His blood ran cold. "No," he snapped, shaking his head. "Not happening. This is not your fight, Captain." "The hell it isn't." Jack shouted over the growing hum of the entity outside. "You're my wife, whether you like it or not, and I don't leave people behind." Zyra blinked, as if the words caught her off guard. Something in her expression softened, but it was brief, fleeting. The pressure in the cockpit spiked. Jack fell against the console again, barely catching himself before his head slammed into the metal. The screens around him began to crack, fractures spreading through the glass as an unseen force tore at the ship from the inside out. "You do not understand," the voice whispered. "She is a fragment, a piece of what was lost. We come to make her whole again." Zyra's body trembled. The energy around her pulsed wildly, no longer controlled, no longer contained. The ship's structure groaned as cracks split through the walls. Jack could feel the ship coming apart at the seams. He had seconds, before the entire vessel collapsed into nothing. His instincts screamed at him to run, to eject, to abandon ship before it was too late. But he looked at Zyra, at the woman the Xelari had feared, the woman the universe itself seemed to bend around, the woman who now stood at the edge of something bigger than both of them. And Jack made his choice. With a grunt of effort, he pushed forward, staggering against the growing gravitational force pressing against his body. His feet barely held beneath him as he reached Zyra and grabbed her by the shoulders. She gasped as their skin made contact. Raw energy surged between them, the glow in her eyes flickering violently. Jack tightened his grip, ignoring the burning sensation spreading across his arms. "You fight this. Do you hear me?" Zyra's breath hitched, her fingers twitching as the pulsing energy tried to overtake her. I don't know if I can." Jack's jaw clenched. "Then I'll fight with you." The voice in his mind screeched in rage. The air turned to fire and ice all at once. The ship's metal walls buckled inward, folding like fragile paper. The outside presence pushed harder, trying to tear Zyra away from him. Jack refused to let go. "You don't belong to them," he shouted. Zyra's hands clenched into fists. The glow around her flared, no longer an uncontrolled storm, but a weapon. A blast of energy erupted from her body, not pulling inward, but pushing outward. The ship screamed as the force wave expanded, slamming into the entity outside. The monitors exploded, sparks showering the cockpit as the gravity snapped back to normal. Jack barely had time to register what happened before the external cameras came back online. The anomaly outside was gone. The presence that had invaded the ship, gone. The only thing left was the endless black of space, dotted with the distant glow of stars. Zyra collapsed. Jack caught her before she hit the floor, his heart still hammering in his chest. Her violet glow had faded, her breathing uneven, her skin damp with exhaustion. She looked up at him, eyes fluttering. "You stayed." Jack let out a sharp breath, a half-smirk on his lips despite the chaos around them. "Told you. I don't leave people behind." Zyra's lips parted slightly, but whatever words she was about to say were lost as her body finally gave in to exhaustion. She went limp in his arms, her breathing steady but shallow. Jack looked around the wrecked cockpit, The ruined controls, the fractured hull. The ship had barely survived that encounter. He wasn't even sure if it was spaceworthy anymore. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms. He had fought battles, waged wars, survived impossible odds. But this was something else entirely. The Xelari hadn't feared Zyra because of what she was. They had feared her because of what she could become. And Jack had a feeling their problems were just getting started. Jack sat in the dimly lit cockpit, his fingers drumming anxiously against the armrest of his chair. The ship was barely holding together, the structural integrity failing in places he couldn't even see. The emergency power hummed, flickering weakly, but the damage was severe. The reactor was running at half capacity, life support was unstable, and weapons were offline. Not that weapons would have done much against whatever the hell that thing was. His gaze drifted to Zyra. She was still unconscious, her body limp against the co-pilot's chair. The faint traces of violet energy that had once flickered across her skin were gone, leaving her looking normal, peaceful, even. But Jack knew better. She was far from normal. And whatever had come for her, it wasn't finished. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The Xelari had set him up. They had married him to something they didn't understand, hoping to rid themselves of her while keeping their hands clean. And now, because of them, he was neck-deep in a war he didn't even know the rules of. The ship's AI crackled weakly to life, the voice distorted from the damage. Incoming transmission. Source. Unknown. Jack's spine went rigid. His fingers hovered over the console, hesitating. After what had just happened, the last thing he wanted to do was open a call from an unknown source. But if it was them again, he needed to know. He pressed the button. A grainy holographic image flickered into view. The figure was humanoid, but barely. Its elongated form was draped in layered robes, its face obscured by a smooth mask with shifting patterns that glowed softly, as if alive. Jack had never seen anything like it. The voice that followed was deep, layered, carrying an unnatural weight. "Captain Carter, you are carrying something that does not belong to you." Jack's grip tightened on the armrest. "Funny. I was just about to say the same thing. Who the hell are you?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying him. "We are the Watchers, the keepers of the balance, and the one beside you is a mistake." Jack's jaw clenched. He glanced at Zyra, still unconscious, her breathing slow but steady. "She's a person, not a mistake." The Watcher was silent for a moment. Then its mask shifted, the glowing lines twisting into unreadable patterns. She was never meant to exist. A cold feeling settled in Jack's stomach. The Watcher continued. The Xelari tampered with something beyond their comprehension. They sought to create a weapon, but what they crafted was far more than they could control. The one you call Zyra is not bound by the natural laws of this universe. She is an anomaly, a fragment of something older, something lost. Jack leaned forward, eyes narrowing. If that's true, then why didn't they just kill her? Because they feared what her death might awaken. Jack's pulse quickened. She is connected to something greater, something that has slept for eons. And now, because of their interference, because of you, Captain, it is waking. Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. "Let me guess, that thing we just ran into, it was part of it." The Watcher's mask shifted again. It was a herald, a fragment of the greater whole, the first of many. Jack felt a headache coming on. Great, just great. "So what?" He snapped. "You calling to tell me to hand her over? Like you fixed the problem?" The Watcher's glowing mask pulsed. "It is not that simple. She cannot be erased, not without consequence. But if she remains, the force that seeks her will stop at nothing to reclaim her." Jack's mind whirled. He had been in unwinnable scenarios before. He had faced overwhelming odds, impossible missions, but this He was caught between God knows what and a group of self-proclaimed keepers who didn't sound much better. His fingers hovered over the weapons console. Dead, useless. Not that it would do much. "I don't trust you," he said flatly. The Watcher's response was immediate. "Nor should you." Jack blinked. That was not what he expected. The Watcher's form flickered slightly. "Trust is irrelevant. Truth is not. You have two choices, Captain Carter. Flee, and the Heralds will come for you. Or bring her to us. We may be able to contain what she is before it is too late." Jack glanced at Zyra again. She still looked fragile, too human for what they were saying she was. But he had seen what she could do. He had felt it. And if this Watcher was telling the truth, then the entire universe might be at stake. Jack exhaled. "Where?" The Watcher's mask flared with strange symbols. "A station beyond the veil. The coordinates are being transmitted now. It is the only place safe from the Heralds." Jack's console beeped as data transferred into the navigation logs. The Veil. He had heard the name before. A distant, uncharted region of space that even the Xelari avoided. Why there? The Watcher hesitated. Then, with a voice lower than before, it said, "Because it is the last place the Heralds have yet to reach." Jack's gut twisted. That didn't mean they wouldn't. Before he could respond, Zyra stirred. Jack turned just as her fingers twitched, her chest rising with a sharp inhale. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing once more, but softer, flickering like embers in a dying fire. She looked at him, then at the hologram. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "They found me." Jack's breath caught. The Watcher's mask darkened. "And they will not stop." Zyra sat up fully, her expression unreadable. "You want to lock me away." "We wish to preserve the balance," the Watcher corrected. Jack could see the tension in Zyra's posture, the way her fingers curled slightly against her leg. She didn't like this. Neither did he. But what choice did they have? Jack exhaled through his nose. "We're going to the Veil." Zyra tensed. "Jack." "We don't have time to argue," he said, pushing the navigation controls into motion. "Unless you've got a better idea, we need answers. And right now, that's the only place we might get them." Zyra didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flickered, uncertainty battling with something else. Then, slowly, she nodded. Jack turned back to the Watcher. "We're coming." The Watcher inclined its head. "Then we will be waiting." With that, the hologram blinked out. Jack exhaled, gripping the controls. The ship trembled as it prepared to jump. Zyra watched the screens, her expression distant. Jack glanced at her. "You okay?" She didn't look at him. "I don't know." Jack didn't either. As the ship entered hyperspace, he had a feeling that whatever awaited them at the Veil, it would change everything. The ship hurtled through hyperspace, streaks of violet and blue light stretching infinitely across the view screen. The hum of the failing engines filled the cockpit, a constant reminder that they were barely holding together. Jack sat in the pilot's chair, eyes locked on the flickering navigational display. The coordinates the Watcher had given him led straight to the Veil, a region of space spoken about only in whispers. Even the Xelari, for all their technological might, refused to go near it. And now he was flying straight into it. Beside him, Zyra sat in silence. She had barely spoken since waking up, her arms folded, her expression distant. The violet glow in her eyes had dimmed, but it was still there, still a reminder of what she was, or what she was becoming. Jack finally broke the silence. "You're not telling me everything." Zyra blinked, slowly turning her head toward him. "I told you what I know." Jack exhaled through his nose. "No, you told me what you think you know. There's a difference." Zyra tilted her head slightly, studying him. Jack had learned to read people, to anticipate their reactions before they even spoke. But with her, it was different. Her expressions were always calculated, controlled. Even now, she was measuring her words before speaking. "I don't know what will happen when we reach the Veil," she admitted. "But I know what I felt when that thing came for me." Jack leaned forward. "And what was that?" Zyra's fingers twitched against the armrest. "Recognition." Jack's stomach tightened. "So you do know them?" "No." She shook her head. "Not in the way you mean. I don't have memories of them." But when it spoke, she hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "It wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking to something inside me." Jack rubbed a hand down his face. This was getting worse by the second. Before he could respond, the ship's AI crackled weakly to life. "Exiting hyperspace in 1 minute. Warning. Unstable gravitational anomalies detected ahead." Jack turned his attention back to the controls. The closer they got, the more unstable the readings became. The veil wasn't just empty space. It was a barrier, a region where physics itself started to break. "Whatever happens when we drop out of hyperspace," Jack muttered, tightening his grip on the controls, "be ready." Zyra nodded. The countdown reached 0. The ship lurched, reality snapping back into place as they dropped into normal space. The moment they did, Jack's breath caught in his throat. The veil stretched out before them, a swirling storm of fractured space, where light twisted and bent in unnatural ways. Chunks of shattered planets floated in the void, some frozen mid-explosion as if time had been paused. In the distance, massive structures of unknown origin drifted, some flickering in and out of existence. And in the center of it all, a station. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen, an ancient monolithic construct of impossible geometry, with spires that reached in directions that defied logic. Its surface pulsed faintly, a mixture of metal and something alive. It looked less like a station and more like a wound in space itself. Zyra inhaled sharply. Jack glanced at her. "You recognize it?" Her fingers tightened against the chair. "No, but something inside me does." Jack's stomach twisted. He didn't like that answer. Before he could say anything else, the ship's communication system activated on its own. A familiar voice filled the cockpit. "You have arrived. Do not delay." Docking sequence initiated. Jack scowled. He hated being expected. The ship jerked slightly as an unseen force pulled them in. Jack's hands hovered over the controls, but there was no point in resisting. The station was guiding them now. The veil's gravitational storms raged around them, but their path remained untouched, as if something was holding reality together just for them. As they neared the station, Jack noticed something even more disturbing. The closer they got, the more the ship's monitors malfunctioned. Readings became erratic, screens displayed impossible data, and for a brief second, Jack swore he saw a reflection of himself on the monitor, but staring back at him with different eyes. Then they passed through the station's outer field, and everything stopped. The turbulence vanished. The readings normalized. The station's docking bay opened before them, an abyss of shifting metal, and soft, pulsating lights. Jack exhaled. "Guess we're doing this." Zyra didn't answer. She was already unstrapping herself, her expression unreadable. The ship touched down. Jack stood up, checking his sidearm out of habit. He doubted it would do much against whatever was waiting for them, but he felt better having it. Zyra moved toward the airlock without hesitation. The moment the hatch opened, a wave of silence washed over them. Jack had been in plenty of alien stations before, but none like this. There were no signs of crew, no lights flickering on to greet them. Just an endless corridor of shifting walls, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal. Then footsteps. Jack tensed as a figure approached from the darkness. It was the Watcher. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 more figures followed, each wearing similar shifting masks, their forms barely solid, as if they existed on the edge of reality. The first Watcher spoke. "You have come, but you are not alone." Jack frowned. "Yeah, no kidding." The Watcher shook its head. "Not her. The other one." Jack stiffened. Zyra's breath hitched beside him. And then she screamed. Jack whipped around as Zyra dropped to her knees, clutching her head. The glow in her eyes exploded, violet light pouring from her skin. Jack reached for her, but an invisible force threw him back, slamming him into the metal wall. The Watchers did not move. The air rippled around Zyra, the walls of the station responding to her presence. And then, a voice. But not the Watchers, not the Heralds. Something else. Something inside her. I have slept long enough. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The words hadn't been spoken aloud. They had vibrated through his skull, through his very bones. Zyra's body convulsed. A deep, resonant thrum filled the air, and suddenly, Jack understood. This wasn't just about her. Zyra wasn't just an outcast. She wasn't just a weapon. She was a prison, and something was about to break free. The air in the station pulsed with an unseen force. Jack could feel it pressing against his chest, tightening around his lungs like invisible fingers. The Watchers stood motionless, their shifting masks unreadable as Zyra trembled on the ground, the violet glow in her eyes spreading across her entire body like cracks in the fabric of reality itself. Jack pushed himself up from where he had been thrown, his muscles aching from the impact. Zyra. He reached for her, but a sudden shockwave of energy erupted from her form, sending him staggering backward again. Her breathing was ragged, her fingers digging into the floor as if trying to hold herself together. The voice, the thing that had spoken through her, was not her own. It was deeper, layered, ancient. You have kept me caged for too long. Jack's heart pounded. Who the hell is talking? The Watchers finally moved, their bodies shifting like mist taking shape. One of them, possibly the leader, stepped forward, their mask pulsing with symbols Jack still couldn't understand. The inevitable, the Watcher said. She was the key, and now the lock is breaking. Zyra let out a strangled gasp, her body shuddering as more violet light flared from her skin. The walls of the station rippled in response, as if reality itself was being rewritten around her. Jack clenched his fists. Fix it. Whatever the hell is happening. Fix it. The Watcher did not turn to him. Instead, it spoke directly to Zyra. You must fight it. Zyra's head snapped up. Her eyes, no longer just glowing but blazing, locked onto the Watcher with an expression that was not her own. She laughed. The sound sent ice crawling down Jack's spine. It was not Zyra's voice. It was something older, something that had waited. Why should I fight myself? The walls groaned as the energy around Zyra spiked. The floor beneath Jack's feet cracked, dark tendrils of nothingness stretching outward from where she knelt. The very air shimmered, distorting, bending in on itself. The Watchers exchanged silent glances before the leader spoke again. This is not yourself. You were made to contain it, not become it. Zyra, or whatever had taken hold of her, tilted her head, the violet light in her irises flickering like a dying star. Contain me. Another laugh. And then the walls collapsed inward. Not physically, not like a building caving in. No, they folded like fabric, reality itself twisting, stretching, tearing. Through the shifting void, Jack caught glimpses of things. Things that had no shape, no form, yet his mind screamed in protest at the mere sight of them. His knees nearly buckled. His body felt wrong, as if he was being rewritten on a molecular level. He tried to move, to grab Zyra, to do something, but the force holding them in place was beyond him. The Watchers, however, acted. In unison, they raised their hands, their bodies pulsing with an energy Jack could barely comprehend. Symbols flickered across their masks, and a barrier erupted around Zyra, cutting off the waves of raw power surging from her form. Zyra screamed. No, the thing inside her screamed. As the energy was forced back, Jack gasped, the pressure on his body easing slightly. His mind was still reeling, but he forced himself to focus. The Watchers were struggling, their movements rigid, their forms flickering. They were holding something back, but not for long. Jack's instincts took over. If Zyra was still in there, he had to reach her. He staggered forward, pushing against the unseen force still rippling through the station. The Watchers didn't stop him, not because they approved, but because they were too focused on keeping whatever was inside Zyra from breaking free. Jack dropped to one knee beside her, his hands gripping her shoulders. Her skin was burning, but he didn't let go. "Zyra, if you can hear me, fight." Her face twisted, her jaw tightening, as if something inside her was at war with itself. "Jack." Her voice broke through, weak, strained. Hers. Jack's grip tightened. "I'm here. You can fight this." The void around them shuddered. The barrier the Watchers had created cracked, violet energy seeping through like blood from a wound. "I don't think I can," Zyra whispered. Jack's gut twisted. "Yes, you can. You are not this. Whatever the hell is inside you, it's not you." Her fingers curled against his arm, weak but present. "If I let it go, if I stop holding it back." Jack's throat felt dry. He already knew what she was going to say. "I might not be me anymore." The glow around her pulsed violently. The Watchers were losing control. Jack made his choice. He pulled Zyra into a desperate embrace, ignoring the fire in his veins, the burning energy threatening to consume him. "You are Zyra," he said through clenched teeth. "You are not a weapon. You are not a prison. You are not whatever they made you to be. You are you." Zyra's body shuddered. The energy crackled, a storm of raw, chaotic force. Jack refused to let go. "You are my wife." The words weren't grand. They weren't some cosmic revelation, but they were true. And Zyra heard them. A pulse of violet light exploded from her body, not outwards, but inwards. The darkness shrieked in rage as it was pulled back, dragged into the very core of her being. The station stabilized. The walls stopped shifting. The air lost its unbearable weight, and Zyra collapsed into Jack's arms, her breathing heavy, her glow fading. For a long moment, silence. Then the Watcher stepped forward. Its voice was calm, but not without weight. "You have done what we could not." Jack exhaled shakily, his arms still wrapped around Zyra's exhausted form. "Yeah. Well, I didn't do it alone." Zyra's fingers curled weakly around the fabric of his jacket. She was still there, still herself. The Watcher inclined its head. "She will never be free of it, but she has proven that she is stronger than what was inside her." Jack nodded. "Damn right she is." Zyra stirred slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack." He leaned down. "Yeah." She exhaled softly, a ghost of a smirk on her lips. "I think I'd like to renegotiate our marriage terms." Jack blinked, then let out a breathless chuckle. The Watcher's mask pulsed. "You are an unusual pair." Jack grinned, still cradling Zyra against him. "Yeah, guess we are." But as he looked around at the veil, at the remnants of what had almost broken free, he knew this wasn't over. Not yet, because whatever Zyra had fought back, it was still waiting.